Welcome back to the Cycle World Podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer, Editor-in-Chief. I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. We thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, share it with your friends. We love our loyal and smart audience and responsive audience and topic suggestions in the comments. And we read those and we try to respond to as many as we can. Kevin's going to chime in. He's brought that up over email in our conversations. So we'll try to get Kevin Cameron in person in the comments. Again, share with your friends. This week we are, as we did last year, we have curated our own list of special bikes from Mecum's auction in Las Vegas. Mecum's sponsoring our podcast, but we do it anyway. The Las Vegas auction is it's January 27th through the 31st. That's a Tuesday through Saturday. They've added an extra day. They're well over 2,000 bikes. It's spectacular. The way American auctions are, it's overwhelming and wonderful. Rolling them across the block, and then they have, they got to run guys through shifts. You can't be an auctioneer going doing the shotgunning all those words for 8 hours. You got to take a break. But last year there was
air traffic control.
Yeah, 100%. You got to relax your vocal cords and your mind. It's a beautiful play, and when you get a really what was that thing? A Thor last year? The V-twin, over $1 million. Being in the room when that hit was unbelievable. And I happened to sit in front of the guy who ultimately won the bid, and he's a very low-key dude, from Utah, and he had his dog sleeping next to him, and it was just haywire. But there's so many good things. 2,000 bikes or more. You can see almost anything you want to see. It's overwhelming and wonderful because they roll everything on the block, but you go like in the warehouse next to the where they have all the bikes stored as they're in order. And you can see almost anything and multiple versions of it even. So It's pretty cool. Like I got to look at a bunch of Ducati 900 SSs, and I like mine very much. It turns out. So it's good. It's a good one. We'll go over a few collections that have come through. Actually, before we get off the Mecum part of this, you can register to bid online. You can do it by phone. You can, there's financing. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. I mean, my recommendation is just go get a room and just pile into it because it's great sitting on the floor and, it's food. It's like Vegas, right? It's got all the other stuff with it. I'll be bringing another big van to any of my friends or colleagues out there who need something hauled, but I'm not leaving with any. Well, maybe I will. So the Lee Mitzel collection, the Mitzel builders, they had bikes last year. They got a bunch of very cool stuff. There's an 87 FZR 750R homologation special in that collection. It was basically the predecessor to the OW01. And I tested an OW01 not in the day, but a little bit after the day. I believe it was a 90 is what I tested. It was owned by Nick Heinech, and we rehabbed it. And what a quality motorcycle that was. It was shockingly good because I was testing it around 2000, and we had the R7. We had 99, 2000. We had the homologation special R7, which was also an exceptionally special motorcycle. But I love this era. I love the late 80s and 90s because I was sort of maturing in my motorcycling at that time. But very cool bike. He's also got it says proper and verified 1978 Ducati NCR 900 race bike, lot R 461. The NCR is like, what is that? The AMG. Like NCR still does beautiful stuff with Ducatis, and it's exceptional. Ben Boschem raced for NCR when he was moved off the factory team in, I want to say 2001, when he had been brought up to World Supers. Beautiful bike. Some other bikes in that collection is the early Bluer Triumphs, and I'm thinking, I was there when those were new, when the Bluer bikes were coming out, and the triples and the big Ford, like the Trophy 1200. And we're wondering, is this finally the time for these to get the credit that they deserve? Or are they old enough to be classic or just old? But it was neat. It was neat to be there for that, and the speed triples, and it was cool. They were real interesting bikes, and it was a nice contrast from Japanese and sort of V-twin dominance. There's also an ex-Norman Reedus TV Star 2018 Triumph Tiger 800, so that's pretty new. I don't know about star power. Sometimes I think if you're a big fan, like I own Dan Gurney's. Well, my wife owns Dan Gurney's XR1200X. That excites me. I don't know. I like that. I like, it's just Dan's motorcycle. He signed the tank, and I have his, in the file, we have his hog card. It says Dan Gurney on his Harley Owners Group card, like the real card. I showed it to his son, Justin. So, well, let's get into the curated list. Maybe we'll start with one of the collections, Robert McLean. You had some insight into his background, and you reminded me of it. But three exceptional bikes coming out of there are a KR500, which is that monocoque race bike, and then a Beale RC174, which is a Honda 297 inline six replica, and a Mondial 250. Let's talk about the Honda 6. and actually, you should say something, Kevin, because you're here too.
Yeah, I shall be glad to say something. I went to the Canadian Grand Prix in 1967, where the 256 was present, and the breathtaking thing about it is warming up. It sounds like excited dogs barking. It makes this whoop, 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 whoop noise. And the mechanic, meanwhile, is being extremely careful not to completely demolish the engine, because the crankshaft does not have circular flywheels. Its flywheels are like candy bars. They're long and narrow. On one end, there are two tungsten slugs, counterweights, and on the other end, there's either a crankpin hole or a crankpin. So they've taken all the weight out of the crankshaft that they possibly can. Now, the motorcycle is small, and everything about it seems right, even though we know in the fullness of time that we wouldn't do it that way today. But at the time, with the rider far back on the bike and flat on the tank with his chin in the little dent in the tank top, it seemed very right in 1967. And what happened, of course, was that Phil Reed won 2 world championships on the Yamaha two-stroke RD56, which was air-cooled, disc valve, parallel twin. And what humiliation for the tower of four-stroke strength, Honda. And this happened in 1964 and 1965. So in the fall of that of 65, they produced this, maybe it was 64. The 6-cylinder was shown at Monza, and it didn't do well. It was immature. It wasn't ready to win races. The information we have on it says 55 horsepower. Well, that's basically the same power as the RD56 Yamaha. The 4-stroke was probably easier to ride because 2-stroke hits pretty hard, whereas those high RPM 4-strokes they're like the effortless opera singer who can just send the note wherever it needs to go. And the engine is compact. It's like 14 inches wide, 6 cylinders. The drive is taken from the center of the crankshaft because you cannot imagine torsional vibration having to be transmitted across 5 cylinders to a drive gear on the end? No, we're not doing that. Everything is driven from the center. The double overhead cams, the gearbox. And the marvelous noise, it's the kind of noise that just kills your ears. You have to turn away and put your hands up to protect yourself. It's like the Vance and Hines, in quotes, Suzuki drag engine. It is so loud. And of course, 6 megaphones are not making any apology for the sound.
None.
They're sending it.
Well, we did that thing with Honda at the 50th anniversary, and we all, a lot of journalists and dealers flew to Tokyo, and then we went to Motegi, and they had a parade basically, and they were running the 6s around, and Freddie Spencer was riding stuff, and I forget who else, Redmond probably, and it was amazing. And they had guys with signs in the corners. They were just running around the oval, and it would be some like little Honda K truck, little pickup truck, and they'd put like an outboard motor in the back, or they'd put a rototiller, and they were highlighting all of Honda's products. And then when they ran the motorcycles around, they had big signs that said downshift, because they wanted people to hear it. Yeah. And then they had that V12. I think it was the RA 71, 72, something like that. But they had that V12, and I was exactly what you said, incredibly quick revving. And I was in the pit as they were getting it ready to send it out. And they were, wow, wow, wow. And it was instant rev change, barking dogs, like you said, taking your breath away. Quite so. It's really.
So George Beale had to build a replica 250, and this is a replica 297. Why not a full 350? Because the motorcycle would have been reduced to a stack of washers if they'd bored it out that far. What the 297 was Halewood's favorite racing motorcycle of all time. It had the good qualities, handling qualities of the 250, but it had more torque. It had wider power. It didn't require such finely adjusted shifting to stay on the power, to keep it moving. Why not ride the 350 4-cylinder that had won so many titles? It was at the end of its days. Now, Shorichiro Iramadri was brought in to perfect the 250, just as he was to develop the 1965 50cc twin RC115, which peaked at 21,500. So that's not red line, that's peak power. So all this makes sense when you sit down and do the numbers. There's nothing out of the ordinary here. The pressed together crankshaft was a miracle of cross fingers and doing the very best you can. Why such lightweight flywheels? Because the lighter the flywheel, the less energy it can store in the form of some form of vibration. What you don't want is for any part of that crankshaft to store enough vibration to slip the pressed joints.
Yeah.
And these crankshafts, the 250, they ran and ran, but there were 5 fresh crankshafts in the truck, and they warmed them up as if they knew that there were plenty in the truck.
Yeah. So it's an interesting story. 67 factory replica, the British builder George Beale, and it's period correct Honda livery, 3rd of 10 replicas. The serial number is like GB03, got all that. The interesting thing here is it was built using Honda blueprints for the chassis and engine with reference to existing actual motorcycles, GP Hondas. Key and carburetors, 7-speed gearbox, alloy gas tank. It was in cooperation. There were 10 replicas made, and it was in cooperation with Honda. Honda was there to help out, and it's as close. It's as much a sliver of the True Cross as you could possibly get. I mean, we know it wasn't there in '67, but it's very cool. And it's the original owner in the collection there. It's just
Bob McLean. Bob
yeah.
McLean was a longtime supporter of racing in the U.S., and then he and his bunch went to Europe, and they ran some no hope bikes in GPs, and they had a good time.
That's what,
I visited their hospitality once. I visited their operation, and it was as though they were each time delighted to be there. And I think that was something about Bob McLean. He yearned to be part of that world, and you you can't be unless you are.
yeah, fair
And
enough.
it's a tough one, but for a time he had every cool puffy jacket manufacturer puffy jacket. He had the hats. He had the passes to the crew luncheon. All these things were important to him. And when they ran the 3-cylinder 2-stroke in the U.S., the one you could buy had ATAC, that is the resonance chambers, on only 2 of the 3 exhaust pipes. And it irked him not to have the ATAC on the 3rd exhaust pipe because that was factory. This was, I mean, you have to be sympathetic to this. Sure, it's a kind of wannabe stance, but he played it big. And you can bet that he played it big because that replica, that George Beale replica, the 297.6, wasn't cheap. He wanted to have it because it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking a van. If I had a bag of money, we'd be leaving with that bike. How good. So I want to get on to lot R708. It's 1982 Kawasaki KR500 race bike. And this is a replica of the bike raced by Cork Ballington to 9th in the 1982 500 Grand Prix World Championship. And I like Kevin's story from the period. There's a video of these bikes also. The McLean bikes are in there's a video on the Mecum website. You can kind of see them in life, as it were. But I like how the chambers kind of pop out. There's like a air vent to let some of the heat out of the tail section, and it's got this giant aluminum gas tank and the Pioneer livery and Shell Oil Dunlop Nolan helmets. It looks great, and then and of course the discs are slotted. They have a very wide track. You can listen to an entire podcast that we talk about the width of brake discs getting shorter and shorter, so that the relative speed of the smaller diameter and the larger diameter are closer, so that heat difference isn't as large. And this is one where Kevin talked about being in the day and slotting the discs because they're wide so that they don't cone. Yeah. And there they are. But tell us about Cork, because I like the job. Well, you said that was pretty good.
I encountered him at Daytona years after his riding career. Of course, he rode the 500. He also rode the twins, the 250 and 350, and won world championships on the twins. Those were the tandem twins with one cylinder ahead of the other. They had disc valves. They were originally made with 7 speeds for U.S. use because that year the AMA had left out the ban on more than 6 speeds. So they went ahead and made a 7th speed. Anyway, I was curious because Ballington rode those 500s, which in their first year, well, for a long time, they were very long. They had very long wheelbases. It was typical for a 500 2-stroke to have a 55-inch wheelbase or so. These things were more like 60. So I said to him, "What about that long wheelbase? What did you say to them about that?" And he said, "Well," he said, looking at me as if I were an idiot, he said, "Nothing. That was the best job I'd ever had." And the nail that sticks up is the one that gets smacked down. So Yeah, handles great. Terrific bike. Yeah, I love it. But later on,
Thanks for the first class tickets.
yeah,
Yeah.
you got it.
Yeah.
Let's continue like this. This is good. Later on, when he grew a bit more bold, he said, "What about trying a shorter wheelbase?" Oh no, the engineers say that won't work. Mumble, mumble, mumble. Um, One of the things that I noticed about our Kawasaki technician when I was associated with, but not part of the U.S. Kawasaki team, was Mr. Yoshida. When called upon to explain something stupid, would say, "Oh, that policy," meaning it's out of my hands. I can't change it. So they finally said, "Okay, we have a shorter swing arm. Let's put that on." And he said, "What a miracle! What a difference!" And every dirt tracker knows this. If the wheelbase is too long, it won't transfer enough weight onto the back when you gas it to keep the back end from spinning. And when it spins, you head for the fence. So they put the shorter swing arm on, and it made a completely different bicycle out of it. But as you'll notice from being ninth in the championship, this isn't ninth in some race, this is the championship. That's pretty far down. So I think that what happened was that Kawasaki did not participate in the classic Japanese era of Grand Prix racing, 1960 to 1967. And when they went racing in the US, they were much more lenient than the other companies in allowing the US team to try stuff. So Team Hansen had C&J build them lots of frames, shorter, longer, taller, shorter. And the late Hurley Wilbert said one day he spent testing between his own bike, which was built to be low, and Randy Hall's bike, which was built to be tall. And he said, Randy's bike was just plain better than mine. And he said, naturally, I've thought about this a lot. And of course, what it is when you build it taller like that, it can transfer more weight to the rear wheel so you can gas it harder out of turns without having it spin and slide out. Now, I think that Kawasaki were probably heavy with theoreticians on this, and that they wouldn't be the first company to have done this.
Well, it's very classic for engineering to have, a lot of theoretical thinking that isn't necessarily, as we've talked about before, fostered by work on the farm where you got to just get her done.
Get her done.
And, the rain is coming and we got to bring the hay in or whatever it is. So, yeah. It just happens, you appreciate what engineering does, but, getting out in the field and actually observing, living it, like the classic thing is a mechanic working on a car that's been designed by a guy who never worked on a car.
Yes.
Like, why is the oil filter under the intake manifold, or why is the oil filter angled this way so that it drips oil all over the whatever, just for practical maintenance purposes.
As Harold Sellers, the late Harold Sellers, put it, describing one of the H1R chassis, he said, in order to change the spark plugs, we have to take off the frame. Now, he wasn't speaking literally. He was just saying nobody thought about what a pain it would be to change the spark plugs on this thing. And of course, in the old two-stroke days, you were changing spark plugs constantly because they were your communication with what was happening in the combustion chamber.
Ducati 900 SS, man. Remove the body work, remove this, remove that. Also, please remove the shock. Because you can't check the valves at the back without taking the shock off.
Yeah.
So you just gotta do it. Shimming and overhead cam, Vela set. You have to commit to at least 3 tries.
Yeah.
Of shimming, because they're bevel driven gears. So you have to, this one has to go this way, this one has to go this way, and this up here it's this way, and this one's this way. You just have to make a commitment, people. Come on, be committed.
Kawasaki decided to build this bike as a monocoque, which means a single tube, a single unit. The
Oh, it's
strength
great.
is in the skin, like an egg.
Yeah, it's like an Omega almost, really. Like the steering head, and then it has this big arch with like usually circular holes in it. We don't have photos of the body off on this one on the auction side. I wish we did.
They do exist.
Yeah.
What those holes were for big rubber bumpers to be put in, so that when they set the tank that was made to fit cork, they shaved and body fillered until they got this tank to actually fit him. Whereas the previous bike was like trying to ride a motorcycle designed by the shape changers, the transformer robot. It was all hard edges and rivets sticking out. Not a comfortable thing to hang off of.
Well, there's a big,
So they narrowed that box frame so that they could set a saddle tank down over it that was more comfortable and therefore faster for Ballington.
Square four.
Yeah, it was a square four disc valve bike like so many others. At the time, their 250, which had separate cylinders, was making probably on a good day 60 horsepower. So that's 60 horsepower. Yeah, 30 per cylinder. So times 4 is 120. And that's what the claim is in the literature for that period.
Pep you up when it hits, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, and of course, that's what Mick Doohan learned riding the NSR 500, that if you stayed above the torque transition, stayed above the point at which the pipes began to really do it, you were much less likely to be upset in mid-corner by a sudden surge of torque that you couldn't turn the throttle backward quickly enough to cancel.
Yeah.
So they were difficult bikes to ride because the nature of the two-stroke is the nature of the exhaust pipe. And you can richen and you can lean and you can do all these various things. And Gordon Jennings told us that long, gradual tapers made for a broad power band. Poobah, not true.
True within the confines of his experience, right?
What you will find in church organs is that there's one pipe for every note.
I have a neighbor with a pipe organ built into the back of his house with, the bass tubes. And it's a 3-story house. The whole back wall is like a false wall and all the tubes are behind. And then it's got air controlled shutters that are damping for sound.
Yeah.
And then he's got that 3-stand organ or 4 or whatever it is. And then the foot pedals and stuff. And you're right.
Four manuals, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a trombone, man. It's not sliding. It's not changing its notes for the tube. They just got a bunch of tubes. So
yeah,
pick your
note.
And
each one plays one note, which is why all two-strokes tend to have a 1200 RPM power band. That's what you get. And so we have to say this Kawasaki is a fascinating period piece because probably Kawasaki said, we don't have our own test track. We don't have a big budget. So let's see if we can substitute ideas for testing. And they went radical.
Yeah,
this bike is the evidence of that. And we have to respect them for deciding to slide their chips out onto that particular part of the table.
Yep. All right, we're going to get on to the next one. This is a 250. This is kind of going a little bit back in time. It's the 57 Mondial 250 Beale Grand Prix racer, and just the timing side of this motorcycle is mind blowing. It's
wonderful because you know that if you pull that cover off, there's just gears, and then gears going out like this. Yeah. It's growing like a tree. And
it's a gear-driven overhead cam. That's what we're talking about.
That's the point of it. Yes.
Yeah, and it's just
in the immediate post-war years, the easiest way for companies with the racing heritage or with the racing ambition to get into racing was to build a copy of the DKW RT 125, which was a 3-speed 125 single, making 4.5 horsepower at 4,500 RPM. And in East Germany, there was Daniel Zimmerman, who added a disc valve to this thing, and he was winning championships when the Stasi came and said, actually, the official race team of East Germany is MZ, so sign this document, give us all your stuff, and get lost. Don't work on motorcycles anymore. But his work lives on. So Mondial were giving this a try. And Alberto Drusiani, an engineer, went to Giuseppe Boselli, who was one of the brothers who had started the company, and said, look, if you give me the wherewithal to build a real racing engine, that is, double overhead cam 4-stroke, we will, so to speak, smoke them. And they did, and they did. It wasn't long before they won the 125 World Championship, and they went on in 1957. There was an interlude there where NSU was tremendously strong. They were putting a lot of money into road racing. And after that, MV were doing it. But in 1957, they won both the 125 and 250 World Championships, and it was a bravura performance. And I love these high revving Italian singles. They are so purposeful and yet beautiful. Of course, beauty's all in your head. Who knows what's in my head? I don't. But these engines continued the good work of NSU in turning racing toward RPM as a means of making high power. As you know, the British for years had perfected their single-cylinder Manx Norton G50. Well, that was later. The AJS 7R, the Velocette KTT 350, and to an extent the BSA Gold Star. They worked on filling the cylinder. They couldn't rev those things up because they were unable to tolerate it. So the Italians led the charge. And when Mr. Honda went to Europe in 1954 to sort of suss things out and buy some hot new machine tools on the side, he bought an NSU and he bought a Mondial and sent them back to Japan for his engineers to ponder.
Yeah, let's check it out. Let's see well, it's good to have answers, that someone else has come to before you decide your own path. And because
you need to know what's possible.
Well, you can do
already.
In the creative, because it is creative, and in the creative arts of what are we starting with? We can do anything, right?
Yep.
We can do anything. Like no one's decided what layout of the engine we should use. There might be some rules, but you're just picking it out of the air. So it's when I'm working on my own things, or I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with gearing or suspension tuning or anything like that, I always look at almost everything that's been done, because I can't really to do my own research. How's this camshaft going to work? I don't know. How's this ignition timing going to work? I don't know. Read and talk about ignition timing, look at the combustion chamber, look at all the combustion chambers, and take all of that. And what do you do? You build an internal average, right? Like, well, this seems to be that. And
it ought to be around here someplace.
Yeah, this chamber looks like that chamber, and it's got 35 degrees of max ignition timing. So let's just start with 33 and see what happens.
Yeah.
I got a friend working on a inline six car engine, a Jaguar engine with Webers on it. And they're driving them
Webers.
insane, because they're very tunable, and there's a lot of different things in a Weber, and the progression holes are very interesting. It's all wonderful. But he's struggling to make it run on transition, and he's we're out on the internet looking at what the internet's saying, which is a backhoe of massive amounts of information, some percentage of which is not accurate, right?
Yes.
And so it's super challenging. But I found the jetting chart in the back of my Weber manual, and I found an Aston Martin with a 4-liter inline six double overhead cam Hemi chamber with 3 dual throat Webers.
An example.
And I said, "How does your jetting compare to this jetting?" Send them the chart. And that's how I do it. And that's how Honda would do it. That's anybody with any brain. Like when you're developing motorcycles, all the manufacturers go out and buy the other bikes.
Yes.
They beat the daylights out of them. Something new comes out, they get it, they take it apart, and like, oh, interesting. Gearboxes. Back when gearboxes couldn't shift. Like if you found a gearbox that shifted, go discover the differences and put them in yours.
Yeah.
That's Kevin's background. Like, hey, I finally figured out how to make a gearbox work. And he has the ingredients of what the dog should look like and the clearances. And Kevin Cameron knows how to make a gearbox shift. I want to do an entire podcast on that and have a transmission open like my 900 SS, which that 4-5 shift is pretty good, but it's not as good as the other shifts. Now, why is that? All right, we're off topic because that's how the podcast goes.
Yes, it develops a swelling, and it just keeps swelling.
Oh man,
we've got all this other stuff here.
Well, there's so many bikes. We're not going to talk about 2000 bikes, but I do want to talk about the 1968 Honda CB750 prototype. It's lot number R757, and that's an important. Just the bike alone is an important motorcycle in and of itself, but having the prototype for sale is something additional, I would say.
And unique, meaning one of a kind. So, of course, we know that Honda started out by working hard to saturate the Japanese market with their product. The product that Japan needed, which was the C100, basically, the 50cc step through, and some outgrowths of it. But just as the British industry had to export after World War II, they were told you must export 70% of what you produce, came to the U.S. And it was a wonderful thing because U.S. riders loved those more nimble British bikes, which had plenty of power compared with Harleys. And there was a dangerous shift toward the imports. And Honda, having saturated the Japanese market and having entered the American market, you meet the nicest people. They knew that Americans wanted something more powerful than the 450 twin with its self-wiping out exhaust rockers. So they took thought. How about we build something to slide under the magic words Honda 4? Because year after year in the 1960s, Honda 4s win, Honda 4s dominate. Household word worldwide. How could they miss? And they didn't. How could they make a product that had electric start and overhead camshaft and for a smaller price than the British 3-cylinders, 750s, which did not have overhead cam, did not have electric start, modern manufacturing systems. The British way was very traditional. Some would argue that having individual craftsmen doing individual jobs has a kind of mystique. But at the wages that were paid, how good a job would you do? Anyway,
Well,
when those motorcycles hit in 1969, the CB750 outsold the three cylinders 10-1. Now, this was not unfair. This was business. If you go into business, you had better recognize you could lose everything. Happens all the time. And the British industry had been hemming and hawing about something other than a parallel twin with the both pistons going up and down together. Let's make the pistons bigger so it will shake the person's back teeth out. They were doing the best they could with the stockholders they had and the methods, the assembly methods they were familiar with. But the CB750 was designed for mass production. It had a one-piece crankshaft that did not have to be pressed together. It had all these automotive-style manufacturing methods included in it, so that it was as far as Honda could go at that time from the old ideal of the kindly old craftsman in octagonal metal framed glasses who pauses his work to fix a toy for a little child.
Of course. Now, we do have an entire podcast on the Honda CB750. So
yeah, we do. But what's
what's
unique here is that this was a pre-production unit that was sent, I think, to the U.S. for some forms of evaluation.
Yeah, Bob Hansen. That's what's on the in the description. 1968 was Sandcast prototype sent by Suichiro Honda to Bob Hansen. It says has hundreds of features to distinguish it from the above mentioned 4 dealer samples, because that's the ones that people used to call prototypes. Was the 4 they sent over to show in '69, but this is the one here, and it talks about some of the details. It's the only CB750 to have a Honda cast into the valve cover rather than OHC 750. And as you know, you got to tell people, right? This is different. This is the Ultra Duramax, whatever, oval wing emblem with 4 small squares. There's a bunch of details to this bike, and it looks beautifully turned out. And it looks like that looks like Monterey to me.
Well, this was Honda's third big super gamble. The first one was to switch from 2-stroke to 4-stroke with the D model. And the second one was the C100, which was designed not for motorcyclists, but for Japanese persons who needed transportation. And it was wildly successful, 120 million sold to date. So CB750 was, let's go to the American horsepower market and see how they liked this Honda 4.
And we did.
They liked it. They liked it.
It did. Just a titanic success and a real change in the marketplace. This next bike is close to my heart, or it should be anyway. It's this it's the 1934 Matchless Model B Silver Hawk, and it's not in all the things of the many years of looking at motorcycles and studying them and reading about them, I did not know about this until it popped up in the Mecum feed, and I was like, what the heck? How do I not know about this, and why have I not tried to own one?
Yeah. Well, what was happening at the time was motorcycles were either singles, bump, 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 or they were V-twins, bump, bump, bump. Because a V-twin, the closer it comes to a 0 cylinder angle, the more it behaves like a single, with both pistons moving up and down together. But in a V-twin with a wider angle, the pistons kind of go this way. So it's sort of like a single. Anyway, there was a theory that the market needed some relief from this, and 2 responses to it were Edward Turner's Ariel Square 4 and this strange narrow V angle, was like two narrow angle V twins side by side, and the cylinders were cast in one block. So it was a very dense with cylinders, although they tell us that there were air passages between them for cooling, so some air did seep through.
Most certainly.
But the intent in both cases was to create a smoother running motorcycle, and one that was propulsively smooth instead of being pushed down the road in a series of shoves as the one cylinder fired. This one, the cylinder firings overlapped and the propulsion was smooth.
Well, this is a very interesting design, narrow angle, 18 degree.
And yet they milled the top of it off flat.
Right. It is off flat, and it looks to
with
be a bevel,
one piece head.
A bevel driven overhead cam.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just it's very classic. This is pre-war. You have a girder fork, and a nice arc from the tank down to the rear suspension. You have a seat. You have a spring that looks like a TZ 750 underneath the seat on this thing.
Yeah,
it's very cool. Fishtail exhaust, little kick in the pipe.
And yet, if we imagine such a thing being built today, it would weigh 500 pounds. The claimed weight is 376. And my son once said to me, why is it that these older motorcycles, you can see right through them, but the modern motorcycles are solid? They're full of stuff. You look at a British parallel twin. You can look right through the thing from one side to the other. Those are the carburetors. There's the battery box, and you can see through to the other side. There's a guy standing over there. I see him. And it was a very different way of building a motorcycle.
Well, we didn't have to worry about a 20-liter airbox trying to do so many different functions and keeping it quiet, or having a 40-pound exhaust system, because it has to have chunks of platinum and huge we're trying to make the exhaust system look delicate, so we put a big boom box, and you have to stuff it up inside under the swing arm or somewhere. High five Eric Buell. It was a different era. It's a beautiful bike, the Silver Hawk. I'm gonna watch it and see what it goes for, and wouldn't it be wonderful to
designed by Burt Collier. It only lasted 2 years. People didn't buy it. The Square 4, the Ariel Square 4, didn't go out of production until 1959. And in the case of the Square 4, diagonal pairs moved up and down together. So there was no rocking couple. There was no primary shaking force. So it was really smooth, and people who wanted to drag sidecars really liked it. So it wasn't a high performance machine, but it had virtues, which lasted a while in the market.
Yeah. I rode one of those, and it was very pleasant. I had a real need for a Square 4 for a long time. I was like, I'm getting a Square 4. And there's admonitions from people you talk to. I'm like, well, yeah, Babbitt bearings, and there's a lot of tricky fiddly business, like you were talking about, the guy with the circular glasses, pouring bearings and scraping them to make them fit. And we just pop main bearing shells in these days. It's that simple. You just say, 10 under, and you find a good machinist to do your crank, and they do it 10 under, and they polish it, and you come back and you put your plastic gauge and bang, and you just put it together, and you're done. There's none of this pouring metal. There was a guy in the Square 4 Club who built a custom that we featured called Something Blue, and he was a very cool guy. He was the guy in the club who did the bearings. You always went to him.
Okay.
And he was the one who knew how to do it, and he'd figured it out, and he was the
what this means in effect is that to service the motorcycle, you had to be a manufacturer in some degree. You weren't just a parts changer. It required technique. So history has left them behind, but they continue to be spoken of.
Well, I mentioned Eric Buell because of the under engine exhaust that we were just talking about. And I chose this bike on the list, because I was there to test all of these, and I tested the tube frame Buells, and I tested the last Buell that we tested, before the closure of EBR, and that was a great test. We were just going through some of the photos, and we had a Ducati V twin superbike in the EBR, and there we were at Las Vegas. It was a really good day, and the bike was great. It did a very good job. It was a little less refined than a Ducati, but it was basically matching it in lap times. The rim front brake caused us problems because the surface finish wasn't quite right. It wasn't ground flat, or the surface was not 100%. We had a vibration under braking, but outside of that, it did exactly what it was supposed to do, and it made the power, and it was competitive, and it was cool, and it was right out of Wisconsin, mostly. I mean,
Wisconsin
via Rotax and all that other business. But this is an XB9R, and 2003 Buell XB9R Firebolt, and this was this was part of the big evolution away from the tube frame. The tube frame Buells were very kind of artisanal, very low volume, and they were elegant, sort of tractor-like, also, running a Sportster engine. This was basically still heavily, say, progressed Sportster engine, but they put the fuel in a twin spar aluminum frame. They put the dry sump oil in the swing arm. That was the oil tank. The exhaust system was completely under the engine. It had the rim brake, and it had radical chassis geometry, a very steep rake, something like 22-ish degrees, and an incredibly short trail. And, talking to the engineers working there, our contributor, Steve Anderson, was an employee of Buell, and his comment to me was, well, if you get enough weight on the front wheel, you can start to do radical things with the geometry to get steering response that you would not otherwise get without the instability, without the head shaking and all that. And they were very good handling bikes. And I picked this bike, and you can elaborate after this, Kevin, but I picked this bike because this is the 984 version. They had the 1203 or 1200 version of this engine also. So they had the XB12 and the XB9. This is a better engine, in my opinion. It revs freer. It just feels happier. Like, I love the big block thing, but this is historic to me. This is my quirk. A Norton 850 Commando. I love an 850 Commando, but I actually like the way a 750 Commando revs. It just feels different and happy. And the same thing with Jaguar engines, 3.8 liter inline six versus a 4.2. 4.2 is a really nice engine, but it doesn't have the butteriness and that kind of stepping on a banana peel feel, and weight of the pistons, displacement, who knows, but it's just different. And that's what I really enjoyed about this. There was a bike called the City Cross, and it had this translucent kind of airbox cover. And it was a really neat bike. And that, to me, that was actually one of my favorite Buells of all time, was that City Cross. But this is XB9 is really neat.
Well, Eric, of course, comes to motorcycle manufacturing from road racing, and he started out on a Harley Airmach Italian-made RR250. He had some arm wrestling with Harley over some issues. He then had a TZ750, and he didn't want to ride other people's stuff. He wanted to design his own stuff. And he had this full-size drawing board in his building on this deflogisticated farm. There was no longer any land associated with it, but it had a barn in which you could fly model airplanes. And it had this lovely building that was dedicated to his design work. And he designed a race bike with a British-made disc valve square 4 engine, and he was just working 3 shifts and weekends to keep it together, to keep the project moving forward. And of course, what he needed was employees. Somebody else was paying. And I think at some point he went to Harley, they went to him. A deal was struck. Can you imagine a person whose background is road racing nodding and smiling in boardroom meetings at Harley-Davidson? It's impossible to contemplate the
To some degree, you
adroitness that he had to display. But he desperately needed a bigger operation than one person could possibly bring to bear on the problem. And so he's designing things. And one of the things that he was very concerned about was mass properties. Now, if you take a complete motorcycle and you support it in such a way that it can rotate around its roll axis, which passes through the center of mass, and you attach a spring to this, you can have it oscillating back and forth. And the length of time that oscillation takes, as compared with a mass whose properties you know in terms of its so-called I, its rotational inertia, you can calculate everything you need to know about the vehicle that you've created and how easy or how difficult it will be to maneuver it around its three axes. So he had two mass properties machines, one for whole motorcycles and the other one for the wheels.
He was obsessed with wheels for sure. Rightly so. It's a great place to concentrate your
because our big example was CB900F, the front wheel with its disc brakes and all of its appurtenances, so heavy, so very heavy. And at the time, that was the standard for a big 4-cylinder motorcycle. But compare it with the front end on an equally powerful 600 from years later, that's nothing. Tubeless tires, cast wheels, 5mm brake discs, the works. And riding them, it's night and day. So the mass properties machines were essential to his vision of a supremely responsive motorcycle. He didn't want to just put together some Lego set. I got wheels from this guy, I got brakes from that guy, I got an engine from the other fella.
No, huge amount of respect for the work that he did, and
Yes.
the product reflected it. I mean, when you ride Buells from that era, absolutely a different experience, and remarkable for their dynamics, considering the lump that was stuck in the middle of that motorcycle. Really, I mean, it's a Sportster derived sporty engine, but
yep,
it's thick.
So one thing that deeply offended him, you can be sure, was the exhaust pipes sweeping down from the cylinders to join into a tremendous thing that sticks out the back. And he's looking at that and shaking his head.
Well, no. Even worse, going up under the tail section. Yeesh.
No, we're not doing this. And he's thinking to himself, what I want to do, if possible, is to have the footprints on the pavement connected by almost nothing to the mass of the motorcycle, which has been squeezed into a lump, which turns in all directions so responsively. So what he did with those sweeping, beautiful exhaust systems that we loved so much in the 1960s and 70s, he made a little stainless steel cylinder that hung under the engine that had the muffler, if there was going to be any EPA compliance required, it was all in there, and it was as close to the center of mass as he could put it. And it made a difference. It showed up on those measurements. Yeah.
It's something I've talked to one of my friends about quite a bit is when that attention to detail or knowing too much, or I don't know if it's knowing too much. Sometimes you feel like it's knowing too much if you're highly obsessed with the details. Some people just cook. You go to a restaurant and the food's just good. It's just good, but it's not artful. Somebody isn't thinking about the details of the acid and the fat and the salt and everything that comes together. Somebody's thinking about that, and whether they know it intuitively or they have a sense of it and they experiment over and over again, they figure out the details. Eric Buell would look at a design of a motorcycle like an RC51 with high pipes coming out the back, 90-degree V twin, stuffing up the wheelbase, all the things that could cause that thing to be problematic, and would look at it and would be like offended, annoyed, right? Like, how can you put those up there? And you have to respect that kind of focus. And you're looking, you were talking about beauty. What is beauty? Is beauty truth? Is an EBR or this Firebolt, is that a more essential truth because we're focusing on the center of mass and all that?
Well, I said to him, that thing underneath the engine there, it makes me think of a World War II naval torpedo plane with the torpedo hung under it. Ah, he said, but it works.
Yeah, well,
and he was right.
Well, they didn't put the torpedoes on top of the tail of the aircraft either, right?
No,
making a sensible decision.
And that's why a fighter like a P-38 with two 1,700-pound engines out on the wings is not going to roll as quickly as a single engine fighter with the single engine right on the roll axis. So these are things you know by inspection. Well, but he had those mass properties machines to refine his instincts. And when it came to designing or acquiring his own engine, it did not have the impossible to fit in the chassis 90-degree twin, which is made possible, which makes it possible to have no primary shaking force. He brought the cylinders together somewhat so that it would package better. It would fit closer to the center of mass and thus make a smaller contribution to the motorcycle's resistance. No, I don't want to yaw. I don't want to roll.
Center of mass is a beautiful segue of narrowing the V and putting the engine wherever you want to the next bike, which is the 2017 Indian Scout FTR 750 flat track racer. It's lot N409. We have a long relationship with this motorcycle, Kevin and I, with Cycle World. We were able to be in on the development of it, going to Swiss Auto. They had an entire engine taken apart for Kevin Cameron to hold the parts and ask questions. This is a classic. Yeah, this is a classic case of starting with what RPM do we need the engine to turn to? How much power do we need? How big do the valves need to be? And how big does the bore need to be to support the valves? And how narrow can we make the V angle? And this is the cascading decisions. And this is where, somebody like Swiss Auto and Gary Gray, who's led this development and was really a huge part of Victory and Indian Motorcycles at Polaris, instituted the testing program. And, how do you make a tank fall past the tip over thing if it's minus 68 degrees? They got all these tests that you have to pass, and they had to figure out how to make sure they were compliant. And he was there. And, here's this bike out of the mind and leadership of a great team at Polaris led by Gary and then Swiss Auto. And they make those decisions. That's the thing, is that they're seeing a truth that we don't see. Like, why'd you use that dumb, wide angle V or whatever? You just have these, passions basically about how it should look or how and this was started. This is theory and practice expressed into a motorcycle that crushed dirt track.
It crushed it
because it had tunable. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hit it.
Well, it's just that the XR 750 was trying so hard at the end. They originally intended it to peak at 7,800 RPM, or was it 7,600? A sort of believable, reasonable number. And At the end, um, Chris Carr said they were giving me a new big end set every race weekend because with rolling bearings, as you raise the revs, the stress goes up as the square. So the stress level was going up so fast, the lifetime of the parts was coming down equally fast.
Yeah, he was
So
talking about something like 9,800, I think, at the end.
yes, and maybe touching 10,000 as you lean over and you go onto a part of the tire that's smaller. So at the same speed, the tire has to spin faster, and so does the engine.
I was so fascinated the first time on a road race track where I was going well,
Going
and
well.
I noted the RPM change related to rapid lean angle change. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh. And then at Ryuyo, the Suzuki test track on the GSXR 750, I think it's a fifth gear kink, kind of on the front straightaway as you go past the pit area where it was parked, and you're in fifth, and you're in sixth, you backshift to fifth, and then you go, it hits the rev limiter as you lean for the chicane, and then I think it's a fifth gear right after that. It's been a long time, but that diameter change. But yeah, 10,000 RPM on an engine that was designed sort of circa 70, and it's it's not ultra modern, but it was still doing the job because the core elements of the XR 750 were exceptional and was still able to win. Like watching Brad Baker ride that, holy cow. Yeah. They knew what the truths were. They knew what they needed. Dirt was dirt, and it had been dirt since 1924 and a little bit before that.
and dirt hasn't changed that much.
Right. You knew what you had to focus on, and it was short enough, and it had a 45-degree V, and you could put the engine where you want, and you could, as you always say, you could smash the front wheel up against it, and you could smash the back wheel up against it, and you could have a wheelbase with a mass where you wanted it. Big circular flywheels. The way the power would come in the torque curve, tapering down, so that it wouldn't spin up. It would be.
They ran the engine. They made a dyno run while I was there, and you could see that it was flat, basically flat from 7 to just short of 11
on the Indian.
Yeah, on the Indian. Then 110 horsepower, more or less. And Gary Gray said, we weren't there for a long time because there was too much of everything. He said a lot of changes had to be made, but we succeeded in making it hook up. And once it hooked up, there was no stopping them because they didn't have to change big ends. They didn't have to be going, ooh, looking at the tachometer. Oh, no, put some tape on that, will you? So it just became completely dominant. Now, the deal that was done was they went to the people in charge of dirt track and they said, what if we build a made for dirt track machine to replace the XR 750, so to speak? Well, how long would you want to do that for? Mumble. And they worked something out. And each side thought that they were getting more out of the deal than they actually did. And there were some repercussions later on. But basically, the bike took over dirt track. People said, oh, it's $50,000. People can't afford that kind of money. Can you afford to build a competitive Kawasaki twin with a different crankshaft, artfully welded up and reinforced crankcases, modified cylinder head from the guy, whoever he happens to be, and all these things that have to be different? You're not very short of making something. It's big money to do that. Oh, we'll just buy the XR 750 kit. It's like knockdown flat furniture. You just click it all together and you're racing. No, it has to be built by someone who builds fast motorcycles.
Well, you better set the cam clearances, the gear clearances just right.
Yep.
That was the thing. It was very. This motorcycle came out, and it's just. I mean, think of the FTR 750 in the classic sense of what a modern sport bike is like for the street. That just run forever, right? You just,
Yeah.
you take an R9. We got this R9, 10 best bike winning sport bike. Take a Yamaha R9 with that triple in it, and start it and ride it to Chuckwalla, and start lapping at Chuckwalla and never stop. Just pull in, change the tires, adjust the chain. Are the brakes okay? Yep. Just get back out there, hit your mileage, do an oil change, start it back up, get back
Yep.
out there, and go and go and go. And it will never stop. And not that this, Indian didn't need maintenance, or, they had the external flywheel. They had to figure out how to make that stop rattling from the early versions. But that was one of the neat quirks of not one of the neat qualities of this bike was it had a changeable flywheel mass on the outside of the engine. So you could actually, you could do that. And that was something taken away eventually. Flat Track said, no, you can't do that anymore. And no, you can't be as light as you are. And no, you can't have the intake area. Their intake area is reduced something like 25%.
Yep.
As they kept trying to control
kept trying to make the homemade
parity.
bikes win. Yeah.
Yep. Getting that parity. Other observations were the exceptionally weighted rear wheels that we saw. So you get these billet wheels, and they were just leaving huge chunks of metal on the perimeter, on the inside perimeter of the rim.
More flywheel mass means it's harder to break the rear tire loose and have it sing up to an RPM that puts you in the boards.
It was a thing of beauty. I was at the debut at Santa Rosa, and Joe Kopp, shout out to Joe Kopp. He was my age when the bike debuted, and he's still my age, but he was younger, as was I. But I was stoked because he was out there going so fast when that bike was there. And I felt, to me, it was always when the torch passed, it was, Brad Baker was exceptional at that race. And it was a very hard track. It was a difficult track to race on. There was a death. Brad Baker was riding the cushion, and no one else was riding the cushion. So he was up there, and it was insane to watch. And he's on an XR, but they just wouldn't run. And the torch passing moment was in one of the heats or something. The bike broke.
Yeah.
And Joe Kopp pushed him, riding an Indian, pushed him up the front straightaway. And I was like, I have this history. And then Terry Vance is like, nearby, because they were running the XRs at the time. Anyway, this bike has never been started. To me, that's a little bit criminal, but then again, and I think it's like number 11. Yeah, the serial number is 11. So it's the 11th. I don't know that for sure, but it is serial number 11. And it is a thing of beauty and a piece of history, and there might be a place to race it, we hope, because I think the most meaning any motorcycle has is serving its purpose, not just existing for
serving its purpose. Yes.
But that's just me. That's what can I say? That's just me. I want to pick a pair of bikes, and actually we're going to pick a trio of bikes. So when we were curating the list, Kevin came back and had 3 different Harley-Davidsons on it from the day. It's a 1933 VL, a 1924 JDCA 74-inch V-twin, and a 1942 Harley-Davidson WLD Sport Solo, that is a very cool looking motorcycle. So what we wanted to do here is these are 3 bikes on auction. They're sort of 20s, 30s, 40s. And I'm turning it over to Kevin to help historically contextualize these, if possible.
Contextualize. Well, Harley needed to make a change. They were building J models, which were intake over exhaust. The cylinder head and the cylinder of these motorcycles were cast in one. So in order to machine the valve seat, you had to bore down, create an internally threaded hole, and then you could push your tool down and machine the exhaust valve port and seat. And then screwed into this was the so-called the valve cage. And this was a structure which had an intake port that went over to join an intake duct that went over to join the one from the other cylinder. And they were both fed by a single carburetor. And originally, there was an atmospheric intake valve in there, which meant that it was held closed by a lightweight spring. And when the piston on intake reduced the pressure in the cylinder, the atmospheric pressure pushed the valve open to fill the cylinder, sometimes called atmospheric intake, sometimes called automatic. And I haven't heard these run, but they say that it makes a soup slurping noise at idle because the valve doesn't open like it would if there was cam driven. It just opens, air goes through it, that reduces the pressure, it closes, the pressure builds up, it opens. There's this soup slurping sound. And they built thousands of those bikes. The next thing was to cast onto the valve cage a little stand with a pivot and a little teeny rocker arm. It's a cute little thing operating the intake valve from a cam down in the timing chest. So this is called intake over exhaust, IOE or SOE, suction over exhaust. And this was the way Harleys were built. So the automobile industry is becoming automated, and the old-time foundrymen are not being replaced. And the price of making these castings with all the head and the cylinder in one piece and the cooling fins and la-di-da, this is the official story. The price is going up. They need a change. They bought a license to build turbulent head Ricardo side valve engines, flatheads. This will fix everything. The nice thing about a good side valve is that it's easy to provide squish, making combustion turbulent, because you just bring part of the head down so that it makes a tight, a close fit to the piston at top dead center. So when the piston comes up on compression and makes that air trapped in there, goes zooming out, it stirs up the combustion chamber so that when the spark fires it, there's a lot of air motion going on to spread the flame.
And squish is usually aimed at where the spark plug is. However,
Yep.
squish is designed, it's squishing toward the spark plug because that's where the spark is, right?
You've got it. So
science, people.
This resulted in the big old flatheads having a reputation for low speed pulling power, because with squish, they didn't detonate if you lugged them. Whereas something like an 8-valve Harley-Davidson, you can bet that it would knock its teeth out if you tried to lug that thing on a dirt track or a board track. They were having to light those things in the 40s, more than 40 degrees of BTDC for the ignition. So Harley starts to produce these license copies of Old Man Ricardo's idea, but it wasn't smooth sailing because people that used these V-series motors hard were occasionally having a piston tighten up. Now, the problem is you've got the cylinder, you've got the exhaust valve sitting right next to it with its stem pointing down so that it can be operated directly by the camshaft in the timing chest, which is well lubricated. It's not up in the cylinder head, so you have to carry an oil can like you were a locomotive engineer to keep squirting oil on it. So they're wondering about this, and they're getting to work on it. Oh, we could try strutting the pistons. We'll put steel elements in them so they don't expand enough to seize. And it just wasn't working out. The flathead idea was attractive at first, but it wasn't the solution. Ultimately, they decided, and mind you, this is during the Great Depression. Nobody has any money. So the fact that Harley undertook this project is gives insight into how urgent it was, and that they built the overhead valve 61E or knucklehead, and that was the granddaddy of all subsequent big twins.
Yeah, we
But
just recently did a podcast on that, and if you want to go listen to Big Twins, it's just behind this one, not far.
yeah, so they wanted to build a 750 overhead valve motorcycle, but when they costed it out, and this is one of the things that is a reality in production. Why don't they make this? Oh, they're crazy at the factory. They should be blah, blah, blah. When they costed it out, the extra parts necessary to put the valves in the head made the selling price more expensive than the V Series 74-inch flatheads.
Mm.
No, we can't do that. They the D model of 1929 was a side valve, and it was given 4 cams all geared together, driven by the rear cylinder's intake cam. And this was a classic arrangement which was continued in all subsequent smaller twins, including in 1957 the Sportster. And of course, what Harley was trying to do with this smaller motorcycle was to compete against Indian, who had the Scout, which in some of its forms was a very desirable and good performing motorcycle. It was not as big as the big 74 or 61s or 80-inch motors.
Legendary and a big success for Indian.
Yeah. So they wanted very much to have an OHV 750, but the Depression said no. The parts counts, no, we can't do this. So then the W model came after this D model, and it was a 3-speed again, side valve or flathead, and then in 1952, this was replaced by the K model, and many dirt track and Daytona 200 races were won by the KR750, which was a side valve. And when you look at them today, the cylinder looks slender. It all seems very almost Edwardian in its spindliness.
Yeah.
But as was pointed out to me, in its time, this was a very sophisticated engine because it had received so much massaging to remove its problems and to accentuate its strengths. And of course, the last time the flathead K Model 1 was 69. And after that came the Iron XR, which was a carrying forward of that 4 cams geared together. Each little gear had a cam lobe behind it. And it was a maddening problem to keep them all from going clickety-click, so that for the racer to avoid fatigue loading on the teeth that clickety-click produced, the gears were made with the teeth cut in 3 different depths. And by having a set of those things, I'm imagining a large case such as might contain a Stradivarius, but instead there are all these cams set into this beautiful velvety, cushiony material.
And then you just fit them over and over again until you get.
And you're just fitting and measuring the backlash until you get what you know has the best chance of surviving. And why are we telling all these stories? We're telling them because riding motorcycles is not the whole story. It's the main story, but not the whole story. And
well, isn't it
to know this, to have this background, to appreciate the energy with which people tackled the creation And the optimization of these machines, I find very rewarding. I
Well,
like to know where ideas came from.
I like to
So,
know, and I like better motorcycles, or motorcycles that they don't even have to be better. They just have to be distinct, right? They have to offer something that moves you. And
sure. Yeah.
a lot of times that is technical superiority. It is better power. It is broader power. It is a certain sound. It is a higher RPM, whatever it is.
But we
It's,
don't have to put a name to it because
yeah.
think of faces. There are some faces you're walking through a dense crowd in a city. There are some faces that just, as you said, move you. You think, oh, what was that? And there's no explanation. Your subconscious mind is not going to tell you. It's not going to tattle on itself. So these are unnamables. But the more we know about it, the greater our appreciation of the whole experience, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
But we would agree.
But we're old codgers, so what do we know?
Hey, easy now. Well, these three bikes are really neat. The JDCA, the 24, is what they like to say is, particularly in England, highly patented. It's sort of monochrome. It's meant to be a very deep green, and I think you can get a hint of that on there. But it looks like very original period finish, and it's got gas lighting on it, and it's wonderful. This is the inlet over exhaust version, and then the next one is the 33 Harley-Davidson VL. And by this time, you're really seeing what's coming with the knuckle. This is what Harley's been evoking for decades, right? Is that line from the steering head down to the rear wheel, and the V twin. And of course, this is a flat head, but it's gorgeous. The finish on this one's black and orange. The tank graphics are wonderful, and the WLD Sport Solo, it's kind of one of my favorite bikes. They're very low production. The description here is talking about 33 models produced that were like this, and it's got a Springer front end and some period, sort of war era accessories and stuff. The museum just picked up a version of this bike, as I call the Harley-Davidson Museum, and it's a period custom built by a guy, Bill Ronsall, who used to work at the museum. But gorgeous bike, and he had it up for sale, and I was like, man, I'd like to buy that motorcycle. It looks very good. But really wonderful bikes. And again, that's got the same kind of line from the tank down to the axle that just evokes Americana in a way that's pretty hard to deny. Well, folks, we're going to call it. We may revisit the list, because when you're faced with the list of 2,000 motorcycles at the auction, at Mecum's auction in Las Vegas, and you go through, as Kevin likes to say, everything reminds you of something else when you get to a certain age. And it's really remarkable, the bikes that come through. We didn't talk about the Honda CBX6 that's coming across, and there's a Velocette 350 KTT that's in there, and you could just go on. The 1904 BSA Minerva, and I think Minerva was kind of maybe not legendary, but Minerva tried the motor everywhere, right? Didn't they move the engine all over the dang bicycle frame?
Well, Minerva were a major producer of proprietary engines, just as the Dion were. Between 1898 and 1900, they produced 20,000. Wow. And those engines blew everywhere across the wind like spores. And in Britain, JAP and Blackburn were two major producers of proprietary engines. They were bought in by a lot of people building motorcycles. They didn't want to build engines. They wanted to assemble them.
Oh, they stuck them on the front of Morgan's too, and they were driving those three-wheelers. Mm-hmm. Well, the list is long. There's a Sunbeam S7 Deluxe, and
let's build something odd.
It is. It's such a cooking model, It's so the S7 is a tandem twin, and it has big chunky tires. And it was really like you envision a guy going to work on the docks, or, riding to a factory in Birmingham, getting up on a cold morning and chuffing off to build whatever, more sunbeams, who knows.
More sunbeams.
But I've always liked the cooking models, as they call them, the cooking models. I mean, a Norton Manx, love it. I just, to me, great. Love the sport models, but having, looking at motorcycles that people were using as transportation, like my MSS, it's a 1954 500 single swing, first year for the swinging arm. And I'm just envisioning a guy, going off to his factory job and chuffing down the green lanes of England.
ES2.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge 150 plus bike British collection. I'm forgetting the name of the guy who has it, but he had a real thing for AJS bikes, and I really I love the AJS singles, the way they look and stuff. It's just, and he's just got all these beautiful examples of it.
And those singles, the two cams, with each with its gear, are driven by a pinion on the crankshaft separately. That is, it doesn't drive one gear and then that gear drives the other. So this way, it's there's no one gear that's getting really knocked hard.
Anyway, we said it was over, and it's not, but it is this time. Thank you for listening. Share it with your friends if you like what we're doing, and subscribe. We'll let you know when they come up. But every Wednesday, we
here we are.
We try not to miss it. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks to Mecum for the sponsorship, and we will catch you next time.